In the 1970s, a philosopher named Thomas Nagel wrote a paper called "What Is It Like to Be a Bat?" Believe it or not, it's become one of the most cited papers in philosophical debates about how consciousness works. We couldn't find a bat, but we did find something even better. Meet Winsome. You might think all you're doing is looking at a hedgehog wearing a tiny hat. But be forewarned, this video is about to get a lot more complex. Winsome is going to help us venture into such daunting fields as the philosophy of the mind, and she's going to help us think about tricky terms like subjectivity, qualia, and consciousness. Let's start with this. Let's start with this. Ask yourself, what is it like to be a hedgehog? Sure, you can look at the hedgehog and imagine what it's like to be a hedgehog. You can take your own experience of the world and then think about what that experience would be like if you inhabited the body of a hedgehog. You can imagine yourself with poor eyesight, like your own, just blurrier and darker. And you can imagine yourself with the ability to curl up into a ball, like your own ability to curl up, just tighter. And you can imagine yourself getting pokey when you feel threatened or frustrated, like your own ability to, oh wait, no, you can't do that at all. At the end of the day, isn't a hedgehog the only thing that really knows what it's like to be a hedgehog? As simple as this question sounds, it gives rise to a pretty heady philosophical quandary. Can we really know anything outside our own mental activity? In other words, can you really imagine something beside the things happening inside your own mind? Is it possible to explain our own consciousness by way of traditional scientific methods? What is consciousness anyway? It turns out that's a hard question. In fact, philosophers have referred to something called the hard problem of consciousness for a few decades now. Most of the time, science looks at things we can see and measure, observable physical phenomena, however small and however far away. But consciousness is different. Consciousness is what we might call subjective. Some philosophers say a complete physical explanation of consciousness is impossible. In other words, mental processes aren't just a collection of a bunch of tiny physical processes. They're more than that. They're something altogether different. Try as we might, we may never be able to close the gap between having a feeling and being able to understand why we have that feeling. This line of thinking goes back to Plato in ancient Greece, and folks like Isaac Newton and Gottfried Leibniz and John Locke and René Descartes in 17th century Europe. What is philosophy supposed to do with this distinction between our physical bodies and our mental processes, these subjective conscious experiences? It turns out we've come up with a name for these subjective experiences, Qualia. When it's bath time for this hedgehog, we can see that she splashes around and tries to climb out, and otherwise has reactions we might deem appropriate for bath time. But she also has qualia, these subjective properties of experience that physical reactions like splashing and climbing just can't account for. Her interactions with the world are different enough from our own that we can't really know what she's experiencing. We can see what it's like to be a hedgehog from our own perspective, but we can't see what it's like to be a hedgehog from the hedgehog's point of view. When we're talking about different individual qualia, in fact, we can't even be sure we're discussing the same thing. We can do all the biochemical and neurophilosophical experiments we want to, and we could even put this little hedgehog in an fMRI machine and look at her brain in action. But we can never quite know what it's really like to be a hedgehog. Unless we can somehow. That's the question. And it gives rise to all sorts of other questions. Questions about empathy, epiphenomenalism, panpsychism, the list goes on and on. For all we know, little Winsome may have all the answers inside that brain of hers. Now, if only we could get access to them.